to Hollywood Africans, the podcast which reframes, recasts, and remakes Africa and Africans in the movies. I am Barbara Angopa.
And I'm Amaka Ugwunkwo.
So, when I was researching this episode, I remembered a child soldier I knew back in Uganda in the 1980s. My siblings and I nicknamed him Cuthbert, and he used to play football with my brothers. Then one day he came to say goodbye because he was being sent to the front line, and we never heard from him again.
Well, that's really kind of horrible.
Yeah.
I mean, was he, when you say a child soldier, was he actually in the Ugandan army, or was he, do you know what army he was going to work for?
Okay. At that time, it was in between regimes. I'm guessing he was in the Ugandan army, although if he was, that's pretty problematic because he was a child and he was guarding a bank.
Yeah.
And that was his job. And then one day he got sent to the front.
Do you know how old he was?
He was clearly a child. Like he was between 12 and 15.
Right,
he was small.
Okay. Yeah.
And but in the fatigues, I can't remember. I don't know if Ugandan soldiers had any kind of like flags, or I wouldn't know if he had a flag on his uniform, but he was definitely a child soldier. I remember it.
In a way, it sounds kind of different to like the story that we're about to talk about, you know, where a child soldier is literally kidnapped into being in the army, whereas he was actually called to be in the army. He had time to come and tell you that he was going to join the army, so which makes me feel that it was a much more professional army rather than a guerrilla group.
Yeah.
But anyway, but that's really must have been quite scary. I mean, did any of your brothers think that they might have to?
No, we were never in that position.
Yeah.
There was never any danger of us being in being called up. I mean, it's unfortunate, but we just had a bit more finance to be able to leave the country if something really bad happened.
Do you think they were paid? That's why somebody would have, and parents would have allowed a child to go off.
Definitely,
because money, poverty,
and it's not just having, it's not just being paid; it's having a gun. Like in Uganda or many countries, not just Uganda, a gun is very, very powerful. And
absolutely.
If the worst comes to worst, if you have a gun and you ask someone for something, people are afraid of the gun. They will just give you whatever you ask for. Yeah. And so that's why I'm sure many parents didn't mind their children being in the military or the police or whatever, even if
it's power and prestige, I guess.
Absolutely, it's power.
Yeah.
The reason I brought up our childhood friend Cuthbert is because I'm trying to decide whether portraying African children as child soldiers is part of a trope. Is an African child soldier visual shorthand for a failed state?
I think it can be. I think it is, actually. I think even a soldier from any country that's a child, because obviously the UN has rules about, who can be a soldier or not, what age people can. And even in the UK, children, well, they are technically children, can join the army, I think at 16.
Yeah. But
you can't see battle until you're 18 or something.
Yeah.
And I think, going back to, World War II, when armies were failing, children were being called to the ranks, particularly in Germany, that they ended up with like very young kids killing grown men from, foreign armies. So yes, it is. I think it is something that's quite disturbing.
Definitely,
to anyone.
But the fact that child soldiers enters the lexicon of what you expect from a movie about Africa is somewhat disturbing.
Yeah, but I think it's also something that's people. It is a shorthand, actually, because, you kind of see that and you think, probably not in a great way, that you think, another failed African state.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's another corrupt.
Exactly.
Because it's also about corruption as well as being failed.
Yeah. So let's get into the film. Beast of No Nation is based on the book of the same name by the Nigerian writer and doctor Uzodinma Iweala. The film follows the life of a 12-year-old boy called Agu, who's forced to become a rebel soldier during a war in an unidentified African country. I think the opening part of the film, I really enjoyed that life before soldiers rolled into this African town. Just the way the families portrayed are just really normal, boring people. I think the dad was a teacher or something. The mum's just normal church mum, the banter and silliness of the children. I like that they're not super rich, but it isn't poverty porn either. No. And I just like the whole way that those scenes played out.
I mean, I liked the fact that, yes, it was a sort of a normalised world. So, it sets up a real child's world because you see all the playfulness, the fun, the joking, the kind of naughtiness. Yeah. So they're really placing our lead character, he is out and out a child. He messes up the television. Absolutely. At first you think, they've probably found some broken TV. But then you go back home and see that he's actually dismantled a properly working television. You've got a town that's rational. They have discussions amongst themselves about what to do with the incoming fighters. The people that feel educated. His dad's a teacher. They feel like very innocent people. And by a twist of fate, their lives get ruined.
Completely up.
The only thing I must say that I was disappointed at with the setting is that it wasn't specific. So therefore, it kind of gives this generalised idea that this is what happens in any African place and you don't need to know the specifics, which is actually, I think, a lot of what's wrong with these kind of ideas about child soldiers in Africa, that you're not being specific as to why these things are happening in these particular places. Yeah. And it's just giving a generalised story, which I think is in itself problematic.
I also think the child actor, Abraham Atta, he really brought his journey in the film, I thought, was quite well done, because the way he plays the sweet boy, the mischievous boy, is very believable, and but also the way he becomes a killer, you believe him, like this is a killer, especially the first kill he has to have.
I know. I mean, as an actor, he did really well. You've got that, like I said, very joyful beginning, this kid, and then suddenly terrifyingly thrown into this world where he literally embeds a cutlass into someone's head. And we see that. And that is just really disturbing. And then you see his trajectory and he becomes this kind of sort of zombie by the end. Yeah.
And it's no matter how many times you see it, it's always shocking when a child crosses to the other side, like becomes completely evil.
It's really, but is clearly he's really forced to do it. He is, and he's seen what's happened to other kids. He's seen people get killed, and he clearly there's a terror that if he doesn't do what he's told, he's going to end up like someone.
He's coerced.
Yeah.
And he's been through this whole camp and indoctrination and training. And
it's so matter of fact as well, especially, the commandant, the way he sort of talks to him and coaxes him, like, oh, you're just cutting a watermelon, or you're just, it's just like that. And that's even more disturbing. Yeah, it really the way he's coerced into it is terrifying, because even though there's a calm voice telling him, he knows what happens if he doesn't do it.
Absolutely. Those camp scenes actually reminds me, just remembered about a book I read about Joseph Kony, and the way the indoctrination that the children go through before they're sent out to battle. And one of the things that they used to do the Lord's Resistance Army, which was a rebel group in northern Uganda in the late 80s and 90s and so on. But they used to rub oil, shea butter, kind of like shea oil is from the shea tree, and tell the children, part of the ceremony is to get them prepped for battle, and tell them that, the bullets would fly off their skin.
Oh, God, okay.
I know. So when I was watching those scenes, I was thinking, the levels with which you have to indoctrinate them and put so much fear in them to be able to go on to do all those things.
Yeah. It's interesting because, like, in the book, the book of Beast and the Nation, Agu is probably less educated than he appears in the film, and slightly more susceptible to that kind of coercion of believing those sorts of things. Because in this film, his father's school teacher. Yeah. And he comes across as somebody who wouldn't believe such a thing. Whereas in the book, actually, he is less educated. I felt from the way, because it's through a first person. Yeah. And his English is not great. No. And so you could feel that someone who could be indoctrinated more easily, I think.
Yeah. When the child soldiers win a battle and take over a town, their leader commandant allows them to rape and pillage. And in the film, Agu's really conflicted. But I remember reading the book, Agu admits to raping women on commandant's orders. But I found myself, what was compelling about the film is you're still rooting for Agu, even though he and his comrades are being forced to commit these really terrible crimes.
I rooted for him, I think, because that's not who he is. Yeah. You saw him right at the beginning. This is someone who's being forced to do that. And, that's what he feels he has to do. I did feel less so for maybe the older boys. Yeah. But, who knows how long they had been. They might have joined the army 5 years before and been Agu
5 years
before. Yeah. But yeah, it was harrowing. But I think one thing that I found interesting in the book that didn't sort of translate into the film was understanding Agu's frame of mind in terms of someone who had ambitions as a child, what he wanted to be in the future, how this war was impacting on the life he thought he was going to lead.
But remember one thing, he's watched his dad being killed and his brother, and his mother is somewhere. He doesn't know where the mother is and the sister. So that his world, as he knows it, and what he thinks he can achieve, I think that's pretty much...
Well, in the book, it's very much that he keeps going back to this idea, because I think it's something to hold on to.
That's it.
I felt in the book it was like giving him some hope of a future. And he prays to God a lot, he talks to God a lot. You see that in the film where he has the voiceovers to God. But in the book, it's much more, he also is somebody who has ambitions to be a prominent person in his world. Yeah. And I think also that's one thing that is missing from this story, that there is something the commandant's connected to in his head, which is, in the book, it's very much like, this is a powerful man. Yeah. I want to be a powerful man. I want to be like him, because in his real world, he wanted to be like some other guy. There was some guy in the village, I think, or the town, that he wanted to be like, somebody people respected, somebody, and somehow Commandant is, in a twisted way, replaced his dad and then has become this figure of power. And in the twisted scenario we have in the book, that's where he's aiming towards, and that's how he keeps following him. Yeah. That's the rationale. Whereas I think in the film, it doesn't go into that complexity.
It doesn't. And also it's not clear why these children, but we'll come back to that, hold that thought, continue following Commandant, who's a really horrible person, as we're going to find out. But what you were saying about the the way he taps into his mind. That reminded me, I was listening to a program about county lines and the drug dealers who send children out to the regions in UK to basically push drugs. But in it said actually the county line managers, the people who manage the children, they look for the good child. They look for the one who follows orders.
Yes.
And because they're the most efficient, they're the ones who are smart, who will push out and maybe...
And less rebellious.
And that's what the same kind of personality that Commandant sees in this boy. Like, he's a good boy. He will do as he's told. He can be institutionalized.
Yeah. And if you pet him, he will follow you.
He responds to reward.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. And he knows what to dangle in front of him. He knows that he is the carrot, not the stick kind of person.
Yeah. But Agu's story reminded me of the case of Dominic Ongwen, a former Lord's Resistance Army commander. So that's a Ugandan rebel group that was operating in northern Uganda. But he was jailed by the International Criminal Court in 2022 for 25 years for rape, murder, and child abduction. But many people thought that it was a far too long a sentence and an unfair one, because he too was a victim because he was recruited as a child.
Do you know how old he was when he was arrested?
Not sure, but there was definitely a man.
Yeah.
He will have been in the army for years. I'm not sure. I can't tell you that without checking.
Yeah.
But he was recruited as a child.
I mean, it's a difficult one, because even the law, the law in most places probably would take that as a mitigating thing. But there comes a point where I think it's, what is it, like 11, where a child is responsible for is held legally responsible for their behaviour. Or is it maybe slightly older? I think it's 11. And I guess you sort of have to balance out, because people aren't robots.
No.
There are children who didn't do it. There are children who ran away. There are children who didn't join. There were children who were probably killed because they wouldn't participate. So I guess it's a difficult one for the authorities to sort of work out how to deal with it. I mean, do you know what was 25 years a harsh sentence? I mean, I don't know how many women and people he raped and murdered.
I don't even...
Probably quite a lot. If we're looking at Agu's story, there was a lot.
Yeah.
And when you look at it, you think, okay, 25 is actually not that long for the numbers of people's lives they destroyed.
It's a very complex question.
Yeah.
Then the menace of Idris Elba's character, Commandant, hangs over the entire film. The way he uses his charisma and violence to get full obedience of the child recruits is chilling. But he also sexually abuses the child soldiers. But in the book, Agu and the child recruits, are privately seething with anger after Commandant's attacks. But that also makes you wonder why they keep following him for so long.
I think it's I guess it's a longer story. I mean, than a feature film can deal with. That the sort of mind control and looking at it's like your friend Cuthbert.
Yeah.
Why did he go and join up the army as a child? Because there's something that they need from it. And maybe they've gotten to a place. And actually, at the end of the film, when they are trying to leave, the Commandant spells out exactly what he thinks is going to happen to them if they don't stay. And maybe he's had that conversation with them, with all these people at some point, which is the fear of what's going to come, because they've committed such awful things that if they don't stay in this family, then, because he's made it like a family, then, what is out there for them? All their families are dead. And I think that's one thing that probably does keep them there, even in spite of the kind of disgusting behaviour that he presents to them. But in the film, doesn't really give the impression that it's happened to all the other kids, possibly to his best friend. Stryker. But because, him waiting outside for him to come out and, and can see something clearly catastrophic has happened to him.
Yeah.
But I think, the reason why it's suggested is also, it's a very violent story. It's a very horrific story. Visualising child rape would probably add a dimension that would be too hard for people to take.
It's far too difficult to...
for an audience to kind of, it's probably easier just to suggest it.
Yeah.
Because it's, you can understand that this is yet another nasty thing that is happening to and you don't need to actually see it.
Yeah.
And I think, it would be really difficult to sell a film.
No, you can't. It's awful.
To kind of get an audience to engage. And, I think it was a 15 rating. And, and also you've got a sort of lead like Idris Elba. I'm sure it's something that he wouldn't want to have on screen.
Absolutely not.
And also, why would you put a child through that as an actor?
Yeah.
Because you also have to be careful. I've worked with child actors, and I did a film where we were filming in Zambia. You had to have a sort of child psychologist sort of involved, trying to help a child understand the story that was being told and what was happening to them as a character, just to make sure that they could cope psychologically. And I think this would have been an unnecessary thing to have a child actor do.
Yeah.
If you could tell it a different way.
Yeah. But the other thing I was going to say about all that, I think also it would be, for those reasons, really off-putting for an audience. I mean, for the audience as well as the child actor, but also the whole male and male nature of it is so controversial in the African setting now.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And that would cause a whole new hornet's nest as well.
Yeah.
So it's just better to suggest it.
Yeah.
Commandant is leading a war on two fronts. First against the government, and then a psychological war against his recruits, because he's got to keep them to take power. But I think that this is different to the way many African warlords are portrayed in films, which are very one-dimensional. But at the same time, I just kept wondering, what is driving Commandant? It's as if what he's doing is definitely complex, like this, what he does. But what is where is this coming from? Why did he join? There's somehow his character seems incomplete.
Yeah, I think it's quite a complex one, because obviously he ends up fighting on three fronts, because don't forget, when things turn against him, he's got the recruits, then the government, and then the army that he's involved with. And I kind of felt like they were trying to portray him as a complex person because he was psychologically imbalanced. He was a psychopath.
Correct.
Essentially. But it's kind of like you kind of wanted to know, sort of wanted to know, where did he come from? In the way we know Agu, where Agu comes from, we know his world. The Commandant felt like he just landed from somewhere.
Yeah.
You understood his motivation, i.e. financial motivation. But, who was he before he joined the army? Why is this the be-all and end-all of his life? Do you know what I mean? It's like you just don't know anything. You don't see him in any other context apart from...
And why does he do that to the children?
Yeah.
Like, did that happen to him?
Yeah. Also, I wondered, is this... because when we see him with his bosses, eventually, they are obviously aware that he's got child soldiers. So I was sort of wondering, is this okay for them? Is that what he's been told? Just get any child or get any adult or get anybody. And it's easier to get a child because an adult will turn against you potentially, which, we see happen. But, a child is more susceptible. But is that the modus operandi of that army? Or is this his own specific way of working? I couldn't quite understand that. you know, how much of it was his crazy, weird army, or how much of it was, you know, other regiments as dysfunctional as that. So it's the context that I didn't quite get.
So hold that thought. That brings us to the end of part 1 of this Hollywood Africans two-parter. But you can join the conversation on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Thanks for listening. I'm Barbara Angopa.
And I'm Amaka Ugwunkwo. You like it?
Yeah.